All right, everybody, we're here with John Buck. We're here with
Hey,
John Buck. We're going to talk about, I guess, theodicy is the topic today. John, this is our first conversation. We sort of connected on the interwebs. It's good to have you here on Philosophy for the People. And before we dive in, John, I'd like to actually learn a little bit more about you and your background. So you're a young Catholic thinker doing a lot of cool stuff online. But what's your background, man? Were you always religious? Are you a convert? Are you a revert? Just give us a little bit, a little bit about you, good sir.
yeah, I'm actually a convert. Not last year. So 2021, was my entrance into the church on Easter. But yeah, I was raised in I guess like a Hebrew roots slash, it's almost similar to Jehovah's Witnesses, or no, not Jehovah's. Yeah, I guess Seventh-day Adventists more so
Sure.
household, whereas like very evangelical and then very much a turn towards like, okay, just stick with the Bible, do aside with any sort of church related thing, and just sort of like work from the beginning and like try to implement all of that into your life. So it was very much like trying to be Jewish while still accepting the New Testament. And so that was how I was raised. And then later in my life, I was like a little bit more curious as to like, okay, well, why is it that we hold to these certain practices? What was the early church of Christianity like? And then that led me into discerning into Eastern Orthodoxy for about 2 years, where I was attending divine liturgy and trying to learn the theology. And all through that time, I had also discovered sort of the apologetics / natural theology of Thomas Aquinas and other Catholic thinkers, and was really stricken by that and the ability to sort of integrate our philosophy and the way that we know things in with our theology and our religion, which I found like a perfect match, especially given how disconnected that was from my upbringing, where I was very like a young earth creationist household, sort of diverging between, okay, this is what secular scientists say, and then this is what the actual Bible says. And so this is what we know to be true, and that's all lies and stuff like that. And so that's where I was really inclined towards Catholicism, is that beautiful sort of integration between ways of thinking together through, at least, I guess by default, through Thomas Aquinas. There's still other thinkers besides him, but he's at least the most systematic, I guess, within the church history.
Yeah, here's a sweeping assertion, but that's all right. I can make one sweeping assertion on my own podcast at least once a day.
You get one.
I get one, and then I get my one armchair like sociological speculation. You gotta indulge every now and then.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm a convert too, but I'm a convert from a non-religious background. But it does strike me that a lot of people who kind of grew up as you did, John, say fundamentalist, young earth creationist stuff, when they leave that, they almost, I don't have stats on this. This is why it's a sweeping and probably inaccurate assertion, but it seems to me the ones they interact with online either become like pretty hardcore atheists or they become Catholic. Do you think that's right?
I think so. It's just that sort of questioning where it's like, you take a lot of things for granted within a sort of Protestant evangelical sort of Christianity, that once you actually start thinking critically, I know there's plenty of evangelicals that do take their faith critically, but I think that like at least a sort of thinking critically can really reduce a lot of those sort of Protestant assumptions. And by reducing that Protestant assumption, if you think, well, Protestantism is sort of essential to Christianity, you're going to reject Christianity once you reject Protestantism. But if you come to think of like, oh no, there's other ways in which you could be Christian besides sort of this sola scriptura of Protestantism, and then that's what's going to incline you either towards Orthodoxy or Catholicism. I think that like right now, there might be a bit more of a rise in Eastern Orthodoxy, just because like within people that are more upset with modern Catholicism, they're sort of more inclined towards the real rad trad elements of Orthodoxy. But yeah, definitely, like if you're somebody that's wanting to take your faith more critically, I think you're either going to be go towards atheism or Catholicism. I definitely do see that.
Yeah, because I obviously get a lot of interaction on my stuff because I write for various outlets, and I'll see stuff that come in from atheists that used to be Christian, and they'll criticize it. But the criticisms seem to have in mind this notion that like Christianity just is young earth creation fundamentalism. And it's always been a curious thing to me, right? Why do they think that's the case? And it seems like they just haven't fully rejected their upbringing, right? It's like they rejected a part of it,
right?
But not the part that says this is Christianity. And that's the part they should reject, right? And have a wider view of Christianity and just hey, maybe Christianity's still true. I just was, maybe I should just become Catholic.
I just had in mind this sort of Protestant sola scriptura understanding of Christianity, and that's what I rejected. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, and so that's and look, there's exceptions to that. I know people that went from that to being agnostic or some other form of Protestant, but it's an observation I've made, and I wanted to get your thoughts on it since that's actually is your background. Okay, so I'd like to spend a little bit more time on this because obviously engaged in a lot of apologetics now. What was it about aside from so you mentioned systematicity of Thomas Aquinas? I talk about that a lot. Like, one thing that's really attractive about Thomas and Big Tent Platonism is, even if you don't necessarily admit that it's true, you have to argue it's beautifully systematic, right? Mm-hmm. Everything links up, it hangs together. You've got this wonderful sort of theory of everything. It's not this sort of hodgepodge quilt of ideas, right, where things are just sort of arbitrarily stitched together. You don't see how they relate to one another. If nothing else, you have to give Thomas credit that, like, the dude was systematic. Was that really the greatest pull for you? And how did that link to Catholicism? Why not just be a Thomist and go I don't know, go pagan or something like that, right?
No, it's funny. Yeah, like, while I was still attending Eastern Orthodox Church, I was very enthralled with sort of the Thomist philosophy, and I figured, like, I can just have what Thomas had to say about God and just sort of work with that in my sort of online apologetics through Twitter, while still sort of like keeping the Orthodox faith as a member sort of there. But yeah, I think that systematicity where, like, within not even just Eastern Orthodox or Protestantism, I also find within, like, the secular world, you sort of have this sort of, like, sequestering of our fields of sciences, our ways of knowing, into various different sort of divergent fields. And it's very frustrating that, like, coming from somebody who was a little bit upset by the fact that, okay, here's what the Bible says, here's what secular science says, and we're going to sort of keep them separate. This is false, this is true. That, like, you kind of have that, or not, it's not exactly like, oh, this is false and this is true within the secular sciences, but it's just like, these are fields which nary will interact with each other at all. And I think it's not just Thomas, but it's mostly his Aristotelian background, where Aristotle was sort of somebody who was a polymath that just sort of like founding groundwork for all of sciences, building up from there with, like, biology and metaphysics and grammar and logic and all these different areas that are all interconnected. They have a common language between the two, and we can sort of understand how they relate to each other. And I think that was the real benefit or the positivity to Thomas Aquinas's thinking, is that he sort of used that sort of Aristotelian structuring in order to sort of ground his theology of Christianity. And I think, it's something that really drove me to it. Just the fact that, we're able to sort of integrate all our areas of knowledge together into one. And I think that, like, having to sort of sequester your areas of knowledge into various different sections is going to, it just leads to a less holistic sort of way of life, I guess. I don't know. That was at least one thing. I guess there's probably just also the fact that Catholicism has a very intellectual sort of pedigree behind it that you don't tend to find in other religions, where you'll have, like, systematic sort of thinkers within each religion, but it's never like the backbone. Whereas I don't know, at least for me, maybe that's just coming from the Thomas Aquinas as sort of my introduction to Catholicism. Maybe for other people,
I don't know, man. Catholicism is really impressive, man. I mean, obviously impressed me. I converted, and even many atheists I still speak with who are sophisticated on the matter tend to admit, when I look at the options, Catholicism seems to be, like, the most impressive, right? Whether or not they're convinced of it, I do hear that admission from the more sophisticated atheists that I hear. All right, problem of evil. You've been thinking about that a lot, and I think that's what we wanted to make the topic of our conversation. You'll have to forgive me. I didn't have time to really familiarize myself with your approach too much. So we're going to give you a little bit of space. So obviously, Thomas Aquinas himself usually gives a million objections to anything he wants to refute. But when it comes to God, he just gives two, right? Yeah. And they're the two objections that you still see in the contemporary literature, right? One, bad things, they don't go with God, right? Gotta give the God thing up. That's obviously a cartoon statement of it, but people understand the point. And then you also have the other objection, which in many ways I almost find more interesting. It's something I've spent more time thinking about these past number of years in the problem of evil. And that is, look, principles of nature are enough, dude. Don't need
Right.
the God hypothesis, right? And Aquinas gives his responses to that. But obviously, the conversation has developed from Aquinas's time, even if it isn't like categorically different. So yeah, John, give us your background on this, and then start leading us into what you have to say about it.
It is kind of interesting, especially there within the Summa, the sort of objection to God from evil is almost like more so a metaphysical objection rather than a sort of moral objection, where it's like, how is it the case that evil can occur when you have this infinitely good being? It's almost like it's just like it's a question of like how metaphysically could this occur, whereas it's not so much like a concern regarding like God's moral character. Now, Thomas might address that in other places. I have like his collection of writings.
That's important. Let me highlight that, right? Because there's many different ways to think about the problem of evil. One is metaphysically. What is the metaphysical status of evil, and how do we make sense of that in relation to, pure being itself or pure goodness itself? Right. And that's where you got to like think about the privation theory of evil and stuff like that. But then there's like what we call the moral considerations of evil. Okay, even if there's like a metaphysical compatibility, how can it be justified morally that God would allow this? And those, to me, those are distinct issues, even if the solution ends up kind of the Thomistic solution can. Actually, I don't think it can. I think you do have to give more than this was a disagreement I had with a relative with the Thomist. The privation account is useful, but it's not the full account. You have to go significantly beyond that, right? I'm glad you mentioned that, John, because I just wanted to. That was a good point. I wanted to just expand on it a little bit.
No, it's funny. Yeah, I share your sort of like bit of frustrations with fellow Thomists who do think that like, oh no, once you like understand evil as a deprivation of the good, then that resolves all problems of evil. Like, no, I guess that might like resolve the metaphysical problem of evil that like Thomas might have been addressing, but there's still going to be the moral concern that I think like if we want to say that God is of a perfectly moral character, a perfectly good being that would only ever do, then I think we have to go further than just saying, oh, well, evil doesn't technically exist in the same way that other things exist. And
to be fair, Thomas does go further. He does say that God has overriding reasons. He doesn't, right? So Thomas himself does go further, but sometimes contemporary Thomists don't, right? They just
exactly.
Anyways, continue,
right? So at least for me, my sort of like honing in point regarding the problem of evil has got to be through evolution. The very processes of evolution that led to yourself and I being here today is what is most in conflict with a sort of general Christian picture of the world. Whereas, at least for my upbringing, being raised young earth creationist, you just read the Bible and it says like, oh, there was no death or evil before the fall. And so that's sort of the general response as to why it is that there's evil. It's because Adam and Eve disobeyed God, and that was the first sin, and that sin brought in evil into the world. And I think that like that's a response to the problem of evil, but I don't think it's going to be a very plausible response to the secular atheist who is raising the objection of the problem of evil. And I think that's got to be our main concern, is when responding to the problem of evil, it's not just to make a coherent picture of the world that makes most sense to us. We're trying to make a picture, respond to the problem of evil in a way that can make sense to the person raising the objection. If it were the case that the person raising an objection was not at all satisfied by your response, but it's like just satisfied you, then you're being almost masturbatory in a sort of way. You're just sort of like fulfilling your own needs without actually caring for the other person and trying to respond to their questions and concerns that they have.
Let's spend a little time on that. That's an important thing to consider, the context here. So in one sense, I think both can be sort of legitimate, right? Somebody could be like, here's why you should give these beliefs up.
Yeah.
And then in that sense, you don't necessarily have to convince them. You just have to say, here's why you're not convincing me, right? But I think most of us do want to go further than that, right? If somebody, especially if we're saying, hey, here's why I think you shouldn't reject God because of the problem of evil, right? Then I think you're absolutely right? We should go further and try and show something a little bit stronger or more robust. And another distinction we didn't bring up is that a lot of the contemporary debate of the problem of evil are now they're not just logical problems or metaphysical problems of evil, they're evidential problems of evil, right? So you get into this sort of weighing game. And the idea is like, okay, there's different weights in the scale. We've got our theistic hypothesis or Christian or whatever hypothesis, and we've got our naturalistic hypothesis. And we go out and we fetch all the data, right? And then see which theory better predicts or anticipates the data, and then how much does that press down on the scale on one side, and then And then, yeah, so that's sort of the game that's played. And obviously, a lot of the skeptics these days are going to say evil is something that, like, they actually vary, right? So some skeptics would be like, okay, it pushes down the scale in favor of naturalism, but not hugely. Others are like, oh, yeah, it just totally drops it, right? And, you know, theists can and have responded to this in many ways. Various theists will just concede it. And they'll be like, hey, there's nothing wrong with admitting that you have some evidence that goes against your hypothesis. That's not actually that difficult to come up with many good and seemingly very true theories, right? What's the case in light of our total understanding, right? So we could just grant that, yeah, this particular fact of the world seems to be better expected and is confirmation of this worldview. But then we've got all these other facts, and so here's where the balance goes. Others, like myself, I'm more on the bold end. I actually like to think when you think substantially about this, it goes the other way. I think evil does ultimately depress the scale in favor of theism. But this isn't about me, John. This isn't about my thoughts. This is about you and yours. So please let me step out of the way and you continue. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, so I think that there's a reason that a lot of evangelical Christians were initially sort of drawn away or like pushed back against the evolutionary picture of the world. And I think it's primarily because, prima facie, it gives us a very strange picture to sort of square with the idea of an all-benevolent, all-powerful, all-knowing God. Just the fact that, like, okay, for millions, many millions of years, you just have animal privation taking place. And through that privation, animals tearing each other apart, killing each other, dying, you have a surplus of species, not enough food in order to sustain all of them, a scarcity. And that's what's going to be selecting between what survives and what dies off. This is a very, what is it? The nature is red in blue. Nature is red in tooth and claw. Right. Yeah, exactly. And so, like, this doesn't really seem like the sort of process that an all-powerful, all-knowing, all-good creator would set in place. Now, maybe it's consistent with such a being. But like, there's plenty of things that are consistent. Like, it's consistently live within the maze right now, or that there's a demon that's sort of like implanting all my thoughts right now. But like, the fact that something's consistent is not really going to be that much of a pressing concern to the atheist. Like, sure, they could grant it's consistent. It's just going to be very, very unlikely. And so that's where I think that I've been trying to consider how to square this evolutionary picture of the world. And like, that's the thing. You don't even, like, as a theist or a Christian or a Catholic, you don't need to accept the evolutionary picture of the world, but I'm just trying to consider the picture of the world that the atheist finds most plausible and trying to show how that can be coherently fit well with the idea of an all-powerful, all-loving God. And I think, yeah, what's primarily rough is the fact that animals experience pain. Like, if you beat a dog, it's going to feel pain and you're doing something morally wrong. And I think once we have our sort of window of awareness of the inner lives of animals besides humans has sort of broadened as time goes on, it just makes the problem of evolutionary animal suffering much harder to square. Were you going to say something?
No, I'm actually I should have prepared this beforehand. I had a quote that was relevant, but I'm not finding it in a timely manner. So you continue, and
Okay.
I am listening to you. So sorry if I look.
No
problem. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
So yeah, this idea that, yeah, animals have experienced pain for millions of years, well prior before the even introduction of Homo sapiens onto the scene. And so the natural sort of Christian picture of the death and suffering entering into the world via the fall of human beings is not going to be very plausible to the atheist. Now, there is a sort of similar type of theodicy that could be raised by the theist from people like Alvin Plantinga, where there's a sort of fall theodicy, but it's not human fall that has introduced sin into the world. It's angelic fall that introduced sin into the world. But being an atheist, you're not going to have angels as being part of your background knowledge. So it's like, sure, their life is consistent. Their experience of the world is going to be consistent with angelic presences, but it's just not going to be something that's going to be plausible to the atheist that's out there. So
right, let me pause right there and hit a couple things that I think make these types of worldview comparison debates complicated. And that, of course, is accounting for what the data actually is versus what is being given to you by your theory, right? So this is an important thing that people overlook, and this is a significant difficulty, right? we don't always agree on what the data is to be explained,
Mhm.
right? And just as data can determine theories, theories can determine data. I mean, moral facts are a great example of this, right?
Mhm.
Are moral facts something that we have to account for? And what drives a lot of moral anti-realism is the theory itself, right?
Mhm.
And then
Mhm.
there's people out there that deny classical logic, for example,
Right.
right? So is
Yeah.
that something we need to account for? So these things get a lot more complicated than I think people want to admit, especially since it's hard to do these comparison games unless and until we agree on the data. So how you compare paradigms, I think, is just, I don't know. I think a lot of this is kind of silly games, honestly, John. The thing that convinced me was just
Mhm.
doing deeper metaphysics, right? Now I
Mhm.
engage in these games because I think they're interesting. And, you know, my buddy Jim thinks the same way. He's written a number, he actually has a paper against Draper on this of why pain is more
Mhm.
expected on theism
Right.
than
Yeah,
atheism.
yeah, yeah.
But he'll be the
With
first one
the
to
facts
admit, he's
about
like,
consciousness and things
I
like
think
that.
this
Yeah.
is totally a silly game to play, but I can't help myself from playing it, right?
Mhm.
I just expressing some of my personal thoughts on it, but it is important to understand that, yeah, we just don't always agree on what. Now, I think personally, and I had a blog post on this, there are certain things that to me just seem like this is stuff that stands in need of an explanation. And if your
Mhm.
theory is eliminating this, or you don't think that your theory can accommodate this, then all the worse for your theory, right? And I think moral facts are one of those things,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
But will that convince somebody who's already, for other reasons, committed to naturalism and anti-realism? That's an interesting question, isn't it? Sorry, it's a bit of an aside, but maybe you
No,
have some
no, no.
thoughts on
It's a
that.
good point though, because yeah, there is going to be that sort of debate that happens between, for instance, the moral realists and the moral anti-realists, and it doesn't seem like there's really a debate about. Um, well, it's like the very data in a way, accounted for is going to be contentious between the two theories that you have, because like the moral realist was going to want to say, no, there's these moral facts that we directly observe or perceive or something like that, and we need to account for that through moral realism of some sort. And then the moral error theorist is like, well, no, that's the very thing that is in contention right now, so you can't use that as data to support your theory. So yeah, it is frustrating. And there's just I guess for me, thinking about like your interlocutor and just trying to grant them as much as you possibly can, or grant them whatever they are most confident in, and then working from Aristotle's argument from motion. It seems to me that like motion is one of the most prevalent things within the universe that we can sort of observe and recognize that there. Now there are those that will contend that motion is an actual thing, like the Parmenideans, or those that are out there that will say, no, everything is all just this giant B theoretic space-time that is all one thing. There's no actual change that ever takes place.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to be doing a lot of damage, I think, to our general like common sense beliefs. But yeah, it's still going to be at least like trying to think about, okay, what is the thing that the interlocutor is most confident of, and then working from there.
Yes.
And that's just going to be the most helpful and charitable for interacting with them, I think.
Yeah. I think, yeah, to an extent. I can't find that quote. I give up. I'm just throwing it away. If maybe I'll try again later.
Do you know who it was from that you were trying to quote from?
Yeah,
or?
no, it's actually from Trent Doherty. This is a very good book, by the way, The Problem of Animal Brain.
Yes.
If people don't have that one, especially if you're interested in these sort of
Mhm.
worldview comparison debates. It's good even apart from that. I think it's just a very good book on The Problem of Evil. But it's irrelevant now because I can't find the quote I was looking for. But to your point, yeah, no, I mean, I think philosophy is that critically reflective term where we try to illumine our experience and set it in relation to the whole, right? And there's just certain things that are actual, so we have to discover the necessary conditions for their possibility, right? Knowledge, consciousness, intentionality about this. I'm going to throw moral facts in there, right? If your theory can't account for these, then to hell with your theory, right? As far as I'm concerned. But it is just, I think, so important to emphasize that depending if you're coming from a particular paradigm, that paradigm might itself just be determining the data. And in which sense it's not really data, it might be just theory, right? Which just complicates these things. I don't know, I don't know how far I would go on that. I see what you're saying, right? Like if I share a lot in common with somebody, then yeah, I'll probably want to maybe go to a fair amount. But like if I'm dealing with a Pyrrhonian skeptic, I mean, what the heck am I gonna?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Right? Then
Then it seems like the best you can do is sort of like, okay, we both agree that there seems to be these things going on. Then what can we sort of
and then they'll sit there just wiggling their finger, right?
Yeah. It's gonna be tough. And so
that's kind of an extreme example.
At some points in stages, like there's just not going to be any way in which to sort of get around. And then I think that's when it's like, okay, well, this line of discussion is no longer going to be fruitful. So I guess we'll have to diverge.
Let's go play badminton. Right.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, something like that. All right. So what I've been working on as of late is what I call the participation theodicy, which basically articulates that the reasons that God might have for creating a world in which there is going to be quite a bit of suffering and evil that can occur is going to be the fact that God is generous towards creation. Generous in the sense that God wants to allow creation to participate in the very process of bringing about an ideal world. So God himself, in his all-powerfulness and all goodness, could have created a world that was initially perfect, a sort of heavenly type world in which everyone existed and was in perfect bliss and happiness with one another. And that could be something that God could have done all by himself, and it would have been good for him to do so. But creatures could have also participated in bringing about that sort of heavenly type world if they were created with the powers to contribute towards that type of world. And it seems to me that for creatures to contribute towards bringing about an ideal heavenly type world would be better than for just God alone to be doing it. Because if we think about it, like, okay, God is doing it alone versus God and creatures are doing this thing, it seems like there's a bit more goodness in a sense that like, oh, we have two beings that are doing this thing rather than just one. And that's not to equate like God with creatures in any way. Like I recognize God is himself the foundation for those beings, and it's not.
It sounds a little bit similar to Rasmussen's upside hypothesis, right? Where God creates other kingly creatures to help kind of write the story. Is that kind of the lines you're thinking along?
Yeah, I think so. And especially that's going to be more later stage in regards to like the very ways that the world will go. But I think the way that I want to think about it is through the entire stage of the creation process. It's not just once you have rational creatures, right? Yeah, exactly. Gotcha. Yeah. So the idea is that, the very best thing that God might be able to do, or that God could do, could be like to create an ideal world of some sort. And if creatures were to exist, the very best thing that they could do would be to contribute or work towards building a ideal world. And so that gives God some reason to create a world in which creatures could contribute towards the bringing about of an ideal world. But in order for creatures to contribute towards the bringing about of an ideal world, those creatures would first have to exist in a world that was not that world. So a non-ideal world, because you can't have A bring about B if B already exists alongside A. So you have to have A and not B in order for A to actually bring about B. And so that gives God some reason to create a world that is initially non-ideal so that the creatures within that world could participate in the process of the idealization, I guess, of that world. Now, that's just like one sort of stage in the process. What we want to do from there is to say that, okay, let's say the conversion of this almost ideal world to an ideal world would be a process of like, oh, we've finally done it. We've idealized the world or something like that. But that prior stage where it's almost ideal, that itself would be a world that God could have created all by himself or through the contribution of creatures participating. And if it would have been good for creatures to have contributed towards bringing about that almost ideal world, then that would give God some reason to create a world that was not yet almost ideal. That being a world in which there are, it's not going to be as close to the ideal world as possible, but it's going to be before that. And I think that you can keep doing this sort of stage well. It would be good for God himself or for creatures to help him in creating that world. And so that gives God some reason to create like the one stage back from there. And I think that can go all the way back into, I guess, like pretty much a neutral stage of existence where God sort of creates a world. And it's not the case that like, oh, you have this infinite series of like ever degrading sort of versions of the world where like, oh, this was like almost negative infinity types of awful suffering that's occurring because the creatures could contribute towards that. I don't think that's actually going to be an intrinsic good of participation. That's going to be an extrinsic good where like, oh, the creatures are just relieving the suffering of other creatures. They're not actually helping to contribute towards bringing about an ideal. They're just sort of helping to get rid of an awful world. And I don't think that's the sort of world that God would have like good reason to create. So I'm thinking that starting things off at a sort of neutral state with a very small amount of creatures that might exist, and then those creatures could contribute towards the existence of other creatures, which could then contribute towards the conversion of the world through this very slow process into eventually an ideal world. And so it's not to say that we currently exist within an ideal world in which everything that might occur within it is going to be in perfect alignment with God's will. Rather, we're going to be at a very early stage in the process of coming closer and closer towards that through the help of God and through the help of creaturely contribution. And so as of yet, that's why there are so many types of evils and suffering that can occur within the world, is because we're not yet at that final point of idealization. Yeah, so that's kind of the general sort of layout of the theodicy.
Yeah. So let me flag a few things there and get your thoughts. It seems to me that it would fall under a sort of best of all possible worlds theodicy. Is that right? It's generally Leibnizian here.
So I think that a best of all possible worlds theodicy,
or at least a best kind of world, if not the best world, a best kind of world type of thing. Is that?
I think I want to say that we're not yet at the best kind of world yet. Like in order to this kind of world, God could have created a best type of world initially, or he could have created a world that was not yet the best type of world. And when within the world in which was not the best type of world, creatures can contribute towards bringing about that best type of world. But prior to that,
no, it sounds to me, and correct me if you're wrong on if I'm wrong on this, misunderstanding. It sounds to me like you're just saying this is a better kind of world where the creatures get to participate.
Yes. Okay.
In bringing about that end per state of perfection.
That's right.
That's how I'm hearing
it. Is better, but I don't know if I would want to say it's the best, because for one, a best world, you could just add one more good thing to it. Maybe,
that's why
maybe a best type of world,
class or best kind or best category.
Yeah, I get what you're kind of saying there. Yeah, I guess I want to say that like the world has not yet reached that sort of point of being the best type of world. It's just the process is like what would be very good for God to do, and also what would be very good for creatures to do.
And generally, when we think about best world, we don't think of any particular state. We think about the whole collection of the way things went. Right.
Yeah.
So the way I'm hearing this, and again, this is the first time I'm hearing this, so I might just be getting it wrong. So please push back if I'm misrepresenting or getting it wrong. Is that your argument seems to be suggesting that this is a better world overall if creatures get to participate in bringing about, call it that ideal state, heaven, whatever, rather than God just sort of putting them there directly. Is that fair to what you're saying?
Maybe like there could be a way in which to sort of articulate it that way. I guess I'm more thinking of like what would be the best type of thing for God to do. That's not necessarily the best type of world for God to create, but rather like of the various sorts of actions that God could do in the bringing about of a world, he could do so either by himself right out, or through the contribution of creatures. And so it seems to me that it's going to be a better thing for God to do to allow creatures. But I don't think that necessarily entails that the world in which creatures are contributing is itself a better world, but rather it's just that God is acting in a better way than he would have otherwise. That's not to say it would have been immoral for God to have created the world initially perfect all by himself. I just think that like by including creatures, that's I don't know, it's providing more opportunities for good actions to be done by those creatures.
Yeah. So that's interesting, because I'm generally skeptical of best of all possible worlds, or kinds of worlds theodicies. Don't worry, I won't be too much of a pain in the butt with you here. So I'm just trying to hear what your position is. But I don't know. Now I'm kind of getting a flavor of maybe a Swinburnian approach here, where God is inevitably going to do the best kind of action. If there is a best kind of action, if there's not a best kind of action, then he's going to perform at least a good action. Is that more of what's driving?
I don't like. At least I know there are.
We have to have something driving it, though, right? Because for the hypothesis to make accurate predictions, we have to say like this actually does come from the hypothesis. That's why I'm kind of like probing at it here, of saying what's driving this from the theistic hypothesis on your side. Right?
Yeah. So I want to say that God is only ever motivated to do that which is good. But I don't want to say that God is only ever motivated to do the very best thing that he could do, because it seems to me perfectly consistent to say that God, being an all-powerful, all-loving being, only creates a world in which there are only like 5 kittens that exist and their mama. And like, that seems like a good type of world, even though it's like very minimal. There's no rational creatures within it. But there's just these 5 kittens that are being sustained by their mama, and that sort of loving relationship between those animals. And I don't think that would be the very best type of world at all for God to create. But I do think that that's some type of world that God could create, and it would be motivated by God's generous, benevolent character. Mm-hmm. So that's the thing. Is like, I'm not so sure that I want to say that our world exactly as it is sort of predicted by God's sort of moral character at all. Just that it's perfectly consistent with God's moral character. But rather, the reason that we see a lot of the evils within the world are not going to be directly from anything within God's character, but rather is going to be due to the contingencies of history. The fact that creatures, I don't know, invested more into, I don't know, let's say land dwelling versus water dwelling is going to be severely shaping the types of creatures that you're going to observe within the world and the types of experiences that they face within that world. Mm-hmm. And so I don't want to say that the fact that like there are mammals is going to be predicted by God's generous character exactly, but it's going to be perfectly consistent with it. So yeah, I don't know. Like, this is maybe an area which
this is good. We're getting into details now, and I know your thought is in development on this. So that's what's I always like doing podcasts like this where we can kind of just jam around, because right. So the idea is that if the atheist is run, their hypothesis is run by a principle of indifference, say, right?
Yeah,
they actually think that predicts, right, the sort of amount of suffering and evil that we see on the scene, right? So it is true that, right, okay, even if theism is compatible with this, and isn't necessarily predicting a perfect world otherwise, it doesn't mean it makes a better prediction than atheism does. You see what I'm saying, right? So you do have to go further if you really want to match the evidential case. And maybe you don't want to match the evidential case. Maybe you just want to say this. Maybe you just want to say, hold on. Once we get to the data of evil, this used to be my prior position. I still think it's correct, but I've actually gotten bolder and went further in it. Mm-hmm. There's a whole bunch of other data that evil is sort of logically dependent on. Teleology, for one thing, right? The fact that any contingent thing exists is another data, right? That I think just brings naturalism to probability zero. And probability zero is sticky. You can't lift probability zero at that point. So then, like, it's irrelevant. It's totally irrelevant, right? Unless you lift that, unless you get unstuck from those prior data points that are indeed logically prior to our judgments of evil, right? There has to be some sort of, existing things before we can make any judgments about evil. That's how I used to think about it. I still think that's right. I think that there are those prior data points that, like, just naturalism off the table, right? And then that's it, right? But I do think now, and I'm not going to give my account because this is you, that even if we just grant, okay, not probability zero, we'll just let them be unstuck for the sake of argument, and we own in on the evil of our experience. In fact, I think that theism can make better predictions of that. I think about it differently than you do, but I'm trying to get out from you if you think that's the case, if you think theism can actually predict the suffering and evil that we not just personally experience, but the whole history of the world, right? For example, as well, if not better than naturalism, or if you don't care about that and you just want to take off some pressure or some steam. I'm just trying to get what your total objective is here, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so it's funny, in my debate with Emerson Green on his channel, where I was defending a sort of like abductive case for atheism, I actually did make a sort of evidential case from not necessarily evil, but from the journey of goods across time for the existence of God. And I do think it is highly related to my argument, but the argument I was making there is not so much like part of the theodicy, but is itself sort of like an evidential case. And so the case I made there is the fact that on theism, the trajectory of goods across time could be either starting at neutral, going up to a very high number, starting at a sort of medium number, and then moving up to a very high number, or starting at a very high number and staying consistently across time. And I think that on the very high number, that doesn't include creaturely contribution. And so since creaturely contribution is itself going to be a good thing, that should give us reason to think, okay, we should expect either starting at a medium amount of good things and leading to a high things, or a neutral amount of good things and then leading to a high thing. And I just think it's going to be arbitrary to start at a medium number than at a neutral sort of starting position. And so I think that like the very incrementally increase of good things and good types of things that exist within the world over time is itself going to be some evidence favoring theism, especially over naturalism, which, as you were saying, naturalism is going to be some sort of thesis regarding the hypothesis of indifference, along with some sort of position about like only natural entities exist of some sort. And I think that the hypothesis of indifference is not at all going to predict a trajectory, an upward trajectory of good things across time, as well as the increase in the types of good things that increase across time. Rather, we should expect under indifference that it's going to be equiprobable whether we're going in a downward trajectory of good things and an upward trajectory of evil things, and a sort of like mixed correlation between good and evil or things like that. And I think there's just going to be many more possible indifference than on theism that we would expect. And so from the fact that we observed, just looking at our past history of the world, that we started off with, for one, no conscious entities that existed at the very beginning of the world. We just had like the cosmos sort of working, bouncing off, rocks bouncing off of each other. And then through time, we've started to have conscious entities, but they were very simple microbes and things like that. But those simple microbes became more and more complex to where we have like basic organisms, and then mammals, and that have like streams of consciousness and like continuity across time, and then eventually then like Homo sapiens. And so the very fact that we're like moving upward across time in the types of good things that do exist is itself going to be something that I think is going to significantly favor theism, or some sort of theory which posits that good things incrementally go up across time. Like, I guess like there's this axiarchic view where there's like some sort of law of nature that brings about more good things.
That's John Leslie's view. Right. Yeah.
Right.
That's not the typical naturalistic view.
Exactly. Yeah. Because naturalism is going to include the hypothesis of indifference. And so if there is some sort of fundamental law which sort of like drives the world towards better states of affairs, that's not indifferent. That's very different in how it's sort of inclined towards bringing about good things.
Right. So unless you have like a hypothesis of indifference, but then you sort of strap whatever is fundamental with an inclination to do this, and like, okay, now it's just extremely contrived.
If it's inclined to go towards good, that's not indifference. That's exactly the opposite of indifference.
It's indifference, but it's got an inclination. I don't mean to be rude, but some of the things I've seen, they just strike me as very silly like that. Okay, actually, John, you gave me what I was kind of probing for there, and that, so whether people agree with that or disagree with that or have objections is irrelevant to what I was looking at. Is how did you think theism predicts the actual, the sort of moral landscape, if you want to call it that, of our actual experience, and that's exactly what you just gave there. And I think that is important if you want to try and not just take pressure off the problem of evil, but actually see if it can be reversed to any extent. You have to actually try and do that as a theist, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think like that argument that I sort of was giving there is almost going to be an argument, from the fact that we start off with these very limitedly capable entities, and then they become more and more capable over time. And from the fact that they're more and more capable, they're going to be better capable of responding to the evils that might occur in the world. Going to be sort of like using some of the data that we observe within our past history regarding evil and the development of creatures across time is going to be significant in maybe leaning towards a theistic hypothesis. Whereas at least for what I'm doing in the theodicy, I don't think that it's necessarily predicting any or all of the actual evils that we observe. Rather, I think what it's trying to do is it's saying that the atheistic sort of inference that, the atheistic inference that we observe this type of evil, and then from we can infer that God probably doesn't exist. It's just not going to be an inference that's going to be able to go through. So it's not surprising, I guess, on an omnibenevolent theism that we do observe the types of evils that can occur. And that's going to be for pretty much all of the evils that we actually observe. So
even if you're willing to grant that it might be less surprising on atheism, is that what you're saying, right?
Wait, ask that again.
You see what I'm saying, right? You say, okay, minimally what I'm doing is saying this is not entirely surprising on theism, but it still might be less surprising on atheism.
Yeah, so I think my the argument I was making earlier about the trajectory, that is going to be comparative. Whereas what I'm doing with whereas what I'm doing with the theodicy, I think, is going to be more like non-comparative. It's just talking about how, like, within theism, this is not going to be something that we're predicting against at all. It's going to be consistent with theism.
That's good. That's good. I like that. I like that. What you're doing there.
And so, if you want, I can sort of apply the theodicy to various different problems of evil that are sort of out there, like regarding natural teleology of evil that occurs. I guess I'll start with that. So, like,
I mean, of course, we want to see it in application. Go for it.
Yeah, exactly. So, argument for evil, especially drawing from where we were talking about with evolutionary animal suffering, is the very fact that we have animals that exist who have faculties that are designed to inflict pain and suffering into other animals. So, like the scorpion, when it stings you, it's going to feel like fire, it's going to hurt you, and the venom from a cobra, that's going to kill you. These are all evils that will occur because of the faculties that these animals have. Or a porcupine is awful. Like a dog will sort of attack a porcupine and get stuck, and then it'll lead to infection, and then lead to the decrease in health in the dog, maybe even eventually leading to death. And so these are all bad for the creatures that experience these sorts of things, like being stung by a scorpion or a bee. And there are creatures that have these sorts of faculties, which, just from sort of looking at it from a sort of objective perspective, seems like they were designed for the very function of producing suffering into the other creature. So, like the smell of a skunk, or like the sting of a prick of a thorn or something like that. These all have a sort of design function to them, but it's not for like bringing about good things. It's for actually like inflicting damage to another creature. And so the very fact that we observe these sorts of faculties within nature should signify to us that the designer of nature is not itself going to be a perfectly benevolent being. So the atheist will argue. Like, this was a sort of my friend Emerson Green's, his general sort of primary formulation of the problem of evil. And so the way that my theodicy is going to be responding to something like that is to grant the notion that an ideal world that God would be inclined to create would be one in which there are no such faculties designed towards inflicting suffering that occur at all anywhere within that world. But because God wants creatures to participate in the bringing about of that ideal world, that's going to require initially creating creatures within a world that is not yet ideal. And so, because a world that is not yet ideal is not going to have these sort of prohibitions or preventions of these sorts of faculties which are designed to inflict harm and suffering, that just means that the non-ideal world is going to have the possibility for these sorts of faculties to evolve or to be brought about. And so the very fact that we do observe these worlds is not going to be surprising, because, well, in the non-ideal world that God would be inclined towards producing creatures within, these sorts of things can evolve. And it's just not going to be the case have been prevented from evolving, because that's going to be a feature of the ideal world. And so any feature of the ideal world that is worth bringing about is not going to be a feature of the non-ideal world. So you're going to have the possibility for fangs, venom, spikes, and other hazards that can occur within that non-ideal world, so that the creatures within that non-ideal world can contribute towards the bringing about of the ideal world. So
I like all that. I would just want to say, I don't know this other fellow's position at all, but I want to imply this is a position, but I mean, it's definitely not right that those things exist just to cause suffering, right? Exist for the survival of the being, right? And that is itself a good thing. And maybe that's clarified or not, but if I just want to clarify it here as well. It's not like this. It's not like this thing just is there to just inflict pure suffering, right? A pure agent of absolute, and it serves no other function whatsoever.
Right. Exactly.
That's clearly biologically false, right?
Yeah, I guess the idea is that, like, we would assume that any sort of features of an organism to aid its survival is not itself also going to be contributing towards this harm or suffering or damage to another creature. Rather, we would expect an all-powerful, all-loving God to create a creature that can survive and reproduce without inflicting damage on another creature. But it is funny what you brought up there. What I want to do—
that's a better statement, by the way. That one, What you just said was a much better statement.
Okay. What you brought up there is really interesting, and I do want to And I don't even have a name for the sort of like evidential argument that I was sort of laying out earlier. I kind of want to maybe call it like the axiological trajectory argument for theism or something like that. The very fact that like we notice this upward trajectory of good things across time. It is very interesting that for every bad thing that we observe within our biological and evolutionary history, it's going to be correlated with some good thing that's there. And I don't think that's really going to be expected under naturalism at all. It doesn't seem like this very weird thing, the very fact that, oh, this creature has this faculty that is designed towards, well, sure, inflicting harm to another creature, but it's also good that it does that thing. Or the very fact that like a gazelle gets eaten by a lion. Yeah, that's bad for the gazelle. It's also good for the lion, though. So the very fact that there's this sort of good correlated with this evil that is there is going to be kind of surprising under naturalism. Like, it seems like it could have been the case that there were evils that were not correlated with any good under naturalism. It seems like that's a perfect sort of like hypothesis of indifference, where we have a lot of goods that are not correlated with evils and a lot of evils that are not correlated with goods. But it is at least surprising that within our biological history, that pretty much every evil thing that we observe still has some sort of correlated good thing that it's associated with. And so like, yeah, if it's the case that a world created by God would include some evils within it, it's better that those evils are at least correlated with a good thing than if they were to just be evils by themselves. And I think that, yeah, a lot of the natural teleological evils that we observe within the world are going to be correlated with that animal's survival, which is itself going to be a good thing.
Yeah, it's interesting how perspectives can shift when you just expand your,
right.
I guess the number of things you're looking at, right? Or yeah, like, of course, there's other things to consider. Like, is a scorpion even really a scorpion if it doesn't sting?
Yeah.
Right. Deep questions of essentialism and whatnot. And there might be things like that that couldn't be what they are unless they have some sort of element like that. Is a lion really a lion if it doesn't eat a gazelle? There's much debate on that, right? If it isn't, a meat eater. But then I still think what we would expect on theism is at least a balance and a trajectory, right? That if God's going to put these particular things in the world, right, that it's not going to be absolute, utter downward
right
chaos, nonsense.
Yeah, exactly.
All that, right? Yeah.
And so I think it's funny. I think in one of Paul Draper's papers, he has this sort of argument like, okay, let's imagine these two aliens are just sort of observing the span of evolutionary history. And then one is a theist alien and one is an atheist alien. And they're just basically marking the hits and the misses for all the things that are indicative of theism or indicative of atheism. I want to sort of like go through that analogy in consideration of the fact that, yeah, all of these evils are going to be correlated with some good for the creature that has these sorts of faculties. And so is it really a miss for theism, the fact that there are these evils that can occur, or is it going to be still like a bit of a hit? Like the very fact that the biological roles of pains and pleasures is not exactly going to be predicted on naturalism. Rather, it's going to be predicted on theism or on some sort of being that is inclined towards the goods of creatures. Like the fact that pains and pleasures serve this biological role, which is good for the creature itself and is not just superfluous, that's going to be like indicative of some sort of design between pains and pleasures being correlated with the goods of the creature, which is not indifference towards that creature. Otherwise, we would expect that the pains and pleasures would not be correlated with what's good for the creature. Rather, we would just expect that it's going to be just as likely to be correlated with what's bad for the creature or what's good for the creature or what's neutral for the creature. It's not going to have that sort of bias towards what's good for the creature. And so that's an interesting area that once I sort of get through my theodicy and working on that I kind of want to develop this sort of axiological trajectory argument for God's existence as well.
But, yeah, that's because that's I think very easy to fit with certain very plausible predictions from a theistic hypothesis, right? All right, what haven't we hit so far? Any other pieces here, John, that you want to make sure we get on the table?
Yeah, so I think that divine hiddenness is also going to be not only within the sort of academic field of philosophy of religion, but I think even on a lay level, that like you talk to a lot of atheists and usually, or not usually, oftentimes a person will have rejected their Christian faith because they were at a moment of like severe loss and depression and loneliness, and this calling out for questions from God in like a prayerful request, and just getting no response to that. And this sort of silence, divine silence, is something that leads a lot of people to think, well, I asked God to reveal himself to me and he never did so. So I guess God doesn't exist. And that's sort of flippantly, but like from a real emotional level, that's kind of like what leads a lot of people towards atheism. And so I think that's going to be a strong contender in regards to arguments on the atheistic side against theists. And I think that my theodicy, my participation theodicy, can also apply to that, not only to the sort of natural evils that we observe, but even to these sorts of divine evils, I guess you could say, that we observe. And so I want to say that we can grant Schellenberg's, I guess, premise that like an all-powerful, all-good, all-knowing God would be inclined towards bringing about some sort of relationship with all rational intellects between himself and them, or at least all of those rational intellects that are not predisposed towards rejecting God. So what does he call it? The non-resistant non-believer, or non-culpable non-believer. I've heard like it used both ways, but I like non-resistant non-believer a little bit better. And so, yeah, so like he wants to say that if God exists, then there are no non-resistant non-believers, but there are non-resistant non-believers. As I know that's going to be in contention with like Calvinists or some that will read Romans in a particular way. But at least for the atheists, they're pretty confident that they're a non-resistant non-believer, or they can at least consider or imagine somebody that's a non-resistant non-believer. And then so from that, they're going to infer that therefore God does not exist. So what my participation theodicy is going to take contention with that first premise, that if God exists, then there will be no non-resistant non-believers. And I can grant that, yes, in an ideal world that were God to create, there would be no non-resistant non-believers, because that would be the sort of appropriate relationship between the creatures and God. But if God is inclined towards participate in the bringing about of an ideal world, then those creatures would have to initially exist within a non-ideal state of the world. In which case, it is possible that there would be non-resistant non-believers, so that those creatures could contribute towards the bringing about of the creatures or the non-believers that are in the right relationship towards God. So like one example of a way in which participation can take place is through the very act of saintliness. Like I think that like through acting charitably and living as a saint, we can express God's love towards others. And I think that's a way in which creatures can actually participate in the revealing of God's love towards the unbeliever. And I think that like that's a way in which creatures can actually participate in the revealing of divine hiddenness. But because it is the case that not everyone is acting saintly, that there's going to be a lot of instances where there are non-resistant non-believers. And so the idea is that in an ideal world, there would be no non-resistant non-believers. But because God is wanting to allow creatures to contribute towards that ideal world, there is a possibility for non-resistant non-believers initially.
So that definitely has a flavor and element of the way other people like Swinburne think about it, but kind of with a twist as well there. Yeah, it's very interesting. It's very interesting, John.
Thanks.
Good. Okay, so that's cool. We kind of have the theory on the table. You gave us a application to two particular areas. Call it the broad swath of evolutionary suffering or evolutionary evils, and the problem of divine hiddenness. Obviously, we can't cover everything in a podcast. I know you're writing material on this. I don't know if you have anything available for people to go deeper already, or if they just have to sit and wait patiently. But anything else you want to get on the table now, or any summary thoughts or anything overall on this, John?
I guess like one quick sort of summary thought. I have this analogy. So I did write a 6-page paper, and that's pinned to my profile on Twitter if anybody wants to read that through. I actually got a response from an atheist who wrote, I want to say like a 12 or 13-page paper in response. And then we actually discussed it on Dry Apologist channel. And he had some good feedback. But in my paper, I sort of laid out this sort of analogy to sort of express the idea, of God's sort of motivation towards allowing creatures to contribute. And the analogy I have is of a world-class chef that is a family man. He has kids and a wife, and it's Mother's Day. And he has this idea of, I want to make breakfast in bed for my wife because I love her so much and I could do so. But because he wants to sort of like allow his children to also express their love towards their mother, he decides to wake them up and invite them in to work with him and actually creating the breakfast for their mother. Now, these children are very young. They're not very capable. They're going to make some mistakes in the breakfast. They're going to like leave crumbs in the orange juice, which is not great. They're going to overburn the toast, and there's going to be eggshells in it and stuff like that. But there was actual participation from the children in wanting to sort of like help make that breakfast and bread for their mother. And by the end, the breakfast isn't going to be very great. There's going to be a lot of flaws within it. It's not something that the mother would want in and of itself, but the mother would still appreciate the very fact that her children were there and expressing their love in their very limited fashions that they can to do this thing towards their mother. And I want to say that God's reason for creating an initially imperfect world is similar to that, where God wants creatures to be able to participate and actually work with him and to do the very good things that he could have done all by himself, but he wants to invite us in to sort of work with him towards bringing about this sort of ideal world that would be perfect for creatures to exist within. And so that's sort of the I guess like motivation that you could have for God, and also maybe motivation for accepting the theodicy.
Yeah, really fascinating stuff. I really look forward to seeing how you develop this further, John. Obviously, the problem of evil is it's a really important thing for people to think about. I think too many people are way too dismissive of it, right?
Yeah.
Way too superficial about it, and I think that there actually can be really great, not just intellectual but spiritual fruit by really just spending time on this. Because look, at the end of the day, we all suffer. We all, and my posture in life is like most of us are. Most people are, I'm sure, suffering way more than they let on, and way more than we even realize. So again, I always like to give the disclaimer that we're doing the philosophy around this. It can sometimes seem cold and abstract.
Yeah.
That's what you have to do when you're doing philosophy, right? But there's that whole. The problem is you can't really separate those out when it comes to this, right? You can't at the end of the day, at least not for people. Maybe Spock could do it, but we can't, right? At the end of the day, our experience of that is always bearing in on us. So how it's presented, the practical implications of it, very, very important. I think you've given us a lot of good resources here, John. Where can people keep up with you and your work, and just put in all the plugs and mentions, if you don't mind?
Sure. So I'm most active on Twitter, and it's writer John Buck, WRITER. So someone who writes, John Buck, JOHNBUCK. So yeah, that's where I'm most active on there. I do have a YouTube channel. I haven't really done much on that. I did one response to you and Jim Madden on the simulation hypothesis, and then later actually.
Oh, didn't you and Jim interact on that a bit? Actually, okay,
yeah. We actually had a conversation on Dry Apologist channel as well after that, which was actually very fruitful and like.
I thought you were the Dry Apologist. You two are two different guys. I'm sorry, I'm so bad. I'm so bad at social media and Twitter. I apologize. But you're two different people.
Yeah, two different people. No, that's my friend Caleb Cumberland. He has this channel, Dry Apologist, and it was actually through a lot of my discussions with him that I entered into the Catholic faith.
Oh,
so
cool.
Very cool. Yeah, but yeah, he's a very dry person. He's not as I don't know. He had this book that was actually really great and influenced me a lot in my thinking about the problem of evil, but he wasn't happy with it. He took it out of print. And so it's like up until the point in which he writes a new book, I guess, for people to be able to know what his thoughts are. And he's always like deleting stuff from his channel as well. He's like very particular about how he sort of runs his channel and stuff that he does.
Yeah, I get, wanting to leave only the best stuff up. But I've always, I've been on the internet for so long. I've produced so much garbage. Not just in the philosophy space, but I think I've had a YouTube channel since like 2008, the fitness and all this other stuff too. It's like, look, it's good to look back, right, and see how things hopefully have evolved and refined over time and stuff like that. But anyway, that's just a problem for content creators of all stripes, I suppose. But my policy has always been, look, if I step in it, I step in it, and that's just going to be a matter of public record, right? Yeah. Should teach you to be more careful on what you say and how you present yourself,
Yeah, true. But I don't know. I always find it a little bit of fascinating to see the sort of journey of development that has occurred for a content creator over time. But like, if the only content what they perfectly agree with right now, then it just seems like they're almost stale in a way. You want to know that the person that you're listening to is growing and considering things from new lights as time goes on.
Totally. Very good. So writer John Buck on Twitter. That's where to keep up.
Yep.
Gentle listeners, thank you so much. Please do like, share, comment, and subscribe. We'll catch you guys on the next episode. Fair